Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Winback, and on today's episode of Grim Dawn in our Newcomers series, we're going to be talking about abilities and gear. So, before we get into that, it's a YouTube video. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe your heart out, and you can take a look at the build we've got currently. Using the Bone Snap Gavel, our Monster Infrequent Milton's Cask, got from Milton Heart, we can equip our Molten Walkers now for some fire damage. And we've got a War Chief's Glory as well. Ability-wise, we're picking up Blitz here for some movement and some physical damage. Shield Slam comes from the component that we equipped. Then there's Blackwater Cocktail. Overguard is another ability we're using just because we got some random points for it. And then there's Fire Strike and Force Wave, which you are familiar with. Now, all that being said, I did grind up a little bit to level 14 off camera, so there is a jump from the last one to this one. But we're going to turn in the Luther Graves quest, get some XP there, and we can talk about stuff. Let's talk about abilities and gear. So these are going to be two of probably the most important things you'll need to know in Grim Dawn, because they are really just the entire makeup of the game, at least for your character. Oh yeah, and before we get started too, if you at all find yourself getting really deep into Grim Dawn, you enjoy it a lot, I would super suggest a site called Grim Tools for things like area maps, locations for specific shrines, checklists. There's even a build calculator, so if you get to the point where you're just making so many characters and you want to theory craft one before you start playing it, it is a great place to figure that stuff out. But yeah. So all that being said, obviously abilities in every RPG are the most fun part of playing any character that you've got. If your abilities are boring, you're probably going to have a bad time, get bored, and give up really quickly. So all that being said, your abilities in Grim Dawn can actually be broken down into three main categories. And the way that those all affect your gameplay and your scaling into the late game are... well, they're going to dictate how well you last as the levels go on. Grim Dawn has a level 100 level cap, and then once you hit level 100, basically you're just farming gear. You're trying to make your character as best as possible, and doing all sorts of random goodies. Really, like, the end game, in a nutshell, is... how do I farm more gear to make more characters, to get more gear to make more characters? It's really, I don't know. I don't know if there's a better definition for it, but that's the way it plays out for me. So the creative aspect of playing Grim Dawn and creating new characters and all sorts of different combinations is what makes it fun, and that's how the end game pans out for yours truly. Now the detonation site over there, in the flooded passage here, is a secret area. You can't do anything with it at the moment because we don't have any dynamite to open it up, but there are bad guys back there, there is lore back there, there is loot back there, so remember, backtrack, get all the goodies that you can. There's also that location in the lower crossing area that requires some dynamite, but we'll make another video later on to go back to all these locations, rip them all at the same time so you can see where they are, what they lead to, how they all pan out. And that'll be separate from the video with all the shrines, the shrine locations that aren't on your immediate path in the first act here. So I will be doing that video tomorrow. We'll hit all the shrines that we can't find, and then we'll talk about devotions more in depth as well. But since we're today still, and we're clearing out this monster shrine nice and easy, which was a beast shrine because it was yellow. You can also hover over it to see the name, but, you know, figuring things out by color is way more fun. But yeah, so back to the ability categories. So the active are obviously just that. They're active. You push the button, things happen immediately. Hopefully people die, but, you know, that's sometimes not what that ability is supposed to do. Then there's the passives. Your passive abilities are exactly as described. They just do things passively for you. They can be used by either items. You'll have items with passives. you'll have components with passives, you'll have lots of gear with passives, and your classes themselves will also have passives. But how the passives are turned on and off is all kind of dictated by how the passive is applied to you. So if it is a passive in your inventory, it's all going to be dependent on the equipped item. But if you have a class that has a specific passive, it may force you to toggle that passive on and off. It may just have the passive on permanently or some other stipulation, but it'll always be there in the background, assuming that you know to turn it on or remember that it's there. This is just another shrine along the way that you will happen upon easily. As far as right now goes, I think there are 3. And we're just going to walk down to a secret little nook on the right side of the map over here. It's just got a chest and some iron. It didn't actually have anything really big or cool, but as the difficulty goes up in this game, that chest will spawn better loot. So remember that it's there. It's good for stuff. Now, diving kind of deeper into the abilities themselves, active abilities, well, I guess that's as good a place to start as any. Grim Dawn isn't ever going to tell you flat out what an ability does. It does give you this kind of vague description of how the ability is used or some lore surrounding it, but you're never going to know flat out. Grim Dawn is never going to say push button, throw fireball this distance. So you do have to kind of figure out what's going on. You may have to actually pick a couple abilities if you can't figure out from the description what they do, but yeah. I wish the descriptions were better, honestly, but you know what? That's fine. Everything's fine. Grim Dawn is its own game, and it doesn't have to be Diablo. With the item descriptions, the Shambler going down real quick, and we got another monster infrequent that is perfect for our class, but we can't use it until level 18, so we're just going to stick that in the inventory real quick. But anyway, we can take Blackwater Cocktail as an example. So the description that we get is, you know, it's pretty open, it's vague, but really what we figure out is that it's a Molotov cocktail. It's just a bottle full of flammable liquid that you're going to throw, and it's going to make a big fire puddle on the ground. Got it? Perfect. Now, as far as the stats and everything goes into the ability itself, there's a couple things to look out for that are going to be pretty similar across all active abilities that you get. So, the stats are always going to be what draw you to most of the abilities, but as far as brain fart, as far as things that make sense across all abilities, you've got skill recharge, you've got energy costs, and then you have the actual utility effects, the stats that it gives you, that sort of stuff. So skill recharge is just Grim Dawn's way of saying cooldown. So if an ability has a 5-second skill recharge, that means it's on a 5-second CD every time you use it. The energy cost shouldn't take anybody by surprise. It's just the amount of energy you have to spend to use the ability. And then the additional effects that the ability gives you or does for you are what you kind of have to figure out when you choose the ability. So since Blackwater Cooldown has a radius to it, we can understand that it is an AoE ability. And then the remaining stats, it has a very slight amount of fire damage to it. And then on top of that, it has a very significant amount of burn damage to it. So what it's going to do is make a huge puddle of fire that will initially do some fire damage, and then the remainder is burn damage over a very large area. So it is a big AoE Molotov cocktail, and that, in a nutshell, is how you figure out the abilities. That door is going to be locked. We didn't pick up the strange key in this encampment. Not that I really wanted to, because I don't want to go doing side quests in this video just yet. But remember, again, that that's there. A strange key can be picked up in that specific encampment to open that door to take you into a cultist lair with a very difficult boss, depending on your level, with some pretty cool gear. So we'll probably jump back into that at some point, especially if I need more time to fill tomorrow. Yeah. Oh, and sorry. So after the damage stats that you get for the ability, the extra stats that you get are also underneath those. But your Blackwater Cocktail reduces enemies' offensive ability, so it's going to be reducing your enemy's ability to hit you, as well as crit you and crit damage, all that stuff. So there is a lot that goes into it, but figuring out how all that stuff is understood in the game's jargon is it takes some getting used to, I'll be honest. Now, that being said, active abilities, they all do kind of adhere to the same pattern. So if you can figure out one, you can figure them all out. Passive abilities have similar patterns, but since they're passive, they're obviously a bit different to understand. So let's say a Fire Strike, for example. That is going to be our auto attack that we have on our left click right now. There is actually orange text in the description, which is kind of uncharacteristic for abilities, but it specifically says you can use this as your default weapon attack, and we will add the stats to your default weapon attack. So your auto attacks now get the bonuses from Fire Strike. So you're going to replace your left click with Fire Strike to get the passive effects on all of your auto attacks, and just because it's passive doesn't mean it doesn't cost energy. So a Fire Strike at level 1 is going to cost you 1 energy every time that you use it, so that means every swing. So if you're doing 10 swings, you just use 10 energy. Luckily, the energy regen rate on a lot of characters is going to completely offset that, but you can imagine if you do a lot of swinging or you have a lot of abilities or passives that use energy per swing, you could probably run out pretty quickly if you don't have the right energy regen stats. So there are other passive AA abilities that only have specific percent chance to activate, but they generally will follow the same rules. So you may have something like Markovian's Advantage, which is, I think, anywhere from like 10 to 25% that you will get to use it, but it has very beefy stats because it is much less prevalent, and it will hit a lot harder for those rules. We'll go back to the blacksmith here. We'll probably end up getting into that tomorrow with the devotion points, depending on how long the devotion run takes us. But crafting is pretty big, pretty important, and it is pretty complicated in and of itself, so it probably requires its own deal. Yeah, but finally there are, as far as other passives go, you have things like auras or buffs that'll happen for your characters that you'll need to toggle on and off. In the case of something like, there's a Harbinger of Souls for the Necromancer. It's going to give you a permanent vitality and vitality decay stat added to your damage, along with attack and casting speed, and some lifesteal. So this is only while the ability is active. You have to actually toggle the ability on, and when you just come into the game, that means you have to turn it back on. If you're coming back from death, you have to turn it back on. But those stats are permanent for you. You never have to push the button after you've turned the button on. Now, one of the other special things about that ability specifically that it is going to share with other passive abilities is that it's called a quote-unquote exclusive skill. So you can only have one of those at a time. There are multiple classes with exclusive skills at the end of their skill trees, but exclusive skills, you can only have the single one. Regardless of whether or not both of your classes have one, you either pick, say, Harbinger of Souls with your Necromancer or Possession with your Occultist. You can't have both at the same time, which is obviously for the balance of the game, but I mean, it does feel a little bit bad if we're being honest. So, finally we can land on the summon abilities. Summons will actually show you the summon limits, time limits, that is, summon abilities, their health and energy, if applicable, and then obviously all the standard ability stats like recharge rate, energy cost, blah blah blah. Some summons are going to have no health, while some will have health bars, but that's ultimately dependent on the summon that you choose or the summon that your weapon or gear is potentially giving you. Lots of gear in this game will passively spawn a creature for you, which is really cool. And then some gear will actually give you an activatable button to spawn a creature as well. But let's take, so there's Blight Fiend for the Necromancer, summon Blight Fiend. It's got an 18-second cooldown, but it also has a health bar. So basically that means as long as it's got a health bar and it's alive, you don't have to continue summoning it. The contrast to that is something like, I think the Shaman has the, I want to say it's like Guardian Spirit, but that summon is completely invincible, cannot be killed, but it has something like a 20-second lifespan. So you have to continue summoning it every time that it disappears. So it's never going to die, it's always going to help you, but you do have to keep setting it out in order for it to help you. The last general thing to know about summons is how they scale for damage. A lot of summons are going to scale off of a stat called pet bonuses, which you'll see on a lot of the gear that you pull up. There's actually a full detail of the stat on the stat screen's second page, I think it is. But basically your pet can get every stat and damage type that you can, and you can build specifically into having your pet do maybe chaos damage. If you're an occultist and you're doing a lot of chaos damage, you guys can just funnel all of your stuff in there. Or maybe you want them to do acid while you deal chaos damage, and you can do that as well. It's all dependent on the gear that you equip, obviously, but there are options to do stuff like that. Now, the other summons, the other ways that summon scales are going to be off of things called player bonuses, meaning that all the stats that you have will directly influence your summons. So, something like the Oathkeepers, Guardians, or the Night Blades, like Blade Phantoms, not sure what they're called. But those both scale off player bonuses, so they are going to do the same types, and they're going to mirror your damage, essentially. But yeah, all that being said, we're getting close to the end. It is actually going to affect your decisions, especially if you're building pets. If your whole intention is to build a very strong pet squad, you want to make sure that you have the right idea going in for gear and how you want them to deal damage. Also remember, the pet attack button is really, really, really strong. Now, all the ability stuff out of the way, we need to talk about gear before this video just comes crashing to a close. But gear is going to be collected in rarities, starting with common, going up to magic, rare, monster infrequent, epic, legendary, and then finally set pieces. Set pieces aren't more than legendary, but they can be epic or legendary set pieces. Now, common and magic are going to be your white and yellow items, and after about level 7 to 10 or so, you can just set these not to show up and clutter up your inventory, unless you just really need the money. Green items are going to be your rare items, and they'll be providing you more, typically, they'll be provided to you much more, typically speaking. The prefixes and affixes of the item dictate what kind of stats you'll get, but unless you really want to go down the rabbit hole and figure out what those affixes and prefixes are, you can just as easily read the stats. Rare items have anywhere from 3 to 6 random stats. Those stats can be damage, defense, health, additional ability points, blah, blah, blah. You get where we're going. And then any item from a rare and up can have what's called a granted skill, which is just either a passive or activatable ability or summon that will happen based on a condition that the item has. So it could be passive, could force you to push a button, any number of things. Monster infrequent items are the next rarity up, as the name suggests, can only be obtained by specific monsters in the world. Now, some of those monsters are simply one kind of cultist, and there are tons of them, so you could probably get lots of their MIs, but others come from bosses or from particularly difficult monsters, and they only have something like a 12% chance to drop. So, you may end up farming those guys in the late game, but early on, hard grinding, Monster Infrequence isn't the best use of time, I would say. It's definitely more of a late game thing. That said, though, Monster Infrequence are not only going to give you the stats that rare items do, but they also give potentially ability-altering passives to do while you're equipped. Milton's Cask, our helmet right now, is going to give us soldier buffs. It's going to reduce recharge rates, and it's helping us generally with our Blitz ability. Next up are the epic items. The epic items are going to be blue. Epic items have a lot in common with rares and Monster Infrequence, but also come in 3 rarities of their own based on your progression. So epic items will start simply with their names at the lowest level. Then they move up to Empowered for about levels 40 to 70, and then Mythical for levels 70 to 100. Not all epic items have mythical counterparts, though, so just remember sometimes you might get one that doesn't really progress any further than what you've got, which is sad, but true. As the items progress, you'll notice additional stats or abilities on the items. The difference between an Empowered and a Mythical may be the addition of points into an ability that wasn't previously there, or an additional line of stat increases. Basically speaking, though, the difference in stats will be very significant, so you'll usually want to take Empowered over the base or Mythical over the Empowered. And then the next set of items are going to be a Legendary, which are purple. Legendaries are the same as epics, except they don't have Empowered. It's just base and Mythical. And then we will also be getting very, very strong granted skills with these items, as they're meant to be very good, not only in stats, but in utility. You can summon pets, you can get passives from other classes, you can just straight up steal abilities from other classes as well. The purples are just freaking awesome. And this is yet another shrine out in the world that you will happen upon very easily. Don't really have to go searching for it, but that is where it is, and that will be 4. That is 4 of them that are easily findable before we get into that devotion video. And then lastly, as far as items go, there are set items. Set items can be epic or legendary, and then when you collect and equip the required number of pieces from a set, you get pretty big bonuses. They might be passive or active or modify your current abilities in some way that seems really effective or complements your kit in a new light. And then on top of that, set items will show you all of their bonuses at the bottom of their description, so you can see how many pieces you need to get the specific bonus that you want. But remember, the best effects are usually granted at full set, which takes up a lot of gear space. So some sets are going to have 5-piece requirements, and you may have a really special purple item that you want to hang on to that is preventing you from using a full set. So remember, when you're figuring out your gear and your build, that you really, really want to pay attention to that sort of stuff. Now, we are at Warden Krieg's doorstep, which is the first Act 1, or it's the Act 1 boss. He's the big boy. So we're going to call it there. We'll finish out the devotion shrines tomorrow. I'll show you guys where all the extra ones are. We'll dive into devotions a bit harder, see what we've got left, and maybe talk about some crafting. And then go kill Warden Krieg. Call it a day for Act 1 and see where we end up. But thanks so much for hanging out. I'll see you dudes later.